Hello and welcome into this week's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hagele. Today is episode 3 of our programming series, where we're going to break down and explain in pretty good detail the different periodization models and programming models. So we've already discussed the importance of training, but how do we actually use different systems in an appropriate way to be able to develop a framework for how we're going to periodize our training and how we're going to program our training. And so today we're going to break down linear programming, undulating programming, block periodization, and conjugate periodization. From the outset, no one model is better than the other. It all is about the context. So what is your training age that you are programming for? What is the lifestyle and the goals and the demands outside of the gym? What is the best fit for the individual you're programming for or for yourself? So we're going to go into depth on each model and then explain how they can either coexist or be combined, or what you may want to choose based off of your needs analysis. So let's start off with linear periodization. This is the traditional structured progression where intensity increases over time along with a decrease in volume over time. This is that Soviet training method that has been historically favored because it works. It is a very rigid structure where you build up to higher intensities gradually and over time while reducing training volume, while reducing your sets and reps. Typically with linear periodization, you're going to use this with beginners, people who are new to the gym, people who are fresh, who haven't accumulated a lot of those adaptations that we look to achieve early on in training. That's not the first 8 weeks. This can be the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years of training. But ideally, this is something that you're using with more of the younger athlete who has the ability to get into the gym on the days that they need to, who has a very regimented lifestyle. Where I've used this with great practice is with personal training clients who show up day after day, week after week, and train with me in the gym. We've used this with competitive college sport athletes, Division I athletes, who are freshmen and sophomores, who are coming from maybe a little bit of a training background, but they've not really grasped the weight room. Right? They still need to develop. They're still green and we need to develop them. And so linear periodization works incredibly well there because I know where they're going to be. I know when they're going to be able to get to the gym. I know what they're going to be able to hit, and we can progress in this nice linear fashion. But we say that it's only for beginners. But truly, this could be used for, across the board for any type of background. I've used linear periodization in my own programming when training for powerlifting, where I've got structure and I need to hit that structure to be able to get to this end result. Starting off with a hypertrophy phase, working into a strength phase, and then working into a maximum strength peaking phase. So this can be used definitely in specific cases with specific goals, in more off-season training, or just whenever we are really needing to focus in on hitting key specific elements of what we're trying to develop. The key strengths of linear periodization is that it's incredibly simple and it's incredibly easy to program for. It's great for beginners or linear goal progressions. So if you are really looking to develop hypertrophy, linear periodization works. If you're really looking to develop strength, you could definitely use linear periodization to develop that. However, there are some downsides, and those are that it can lead to plateaus quicker, especially if you're using it for extended period of time. At some point, you're just not going to be able to add more weight week to week, right? We talk about this, especially with, your new lifter, someone who's new to the gym. Just add 5 pounds, 10 pounds every week, and you're going to get stronger. That works to a point. But then there comes a point when that just will not work anymore, and now we need to change things up. And so we're going to have to use a different system, a different model to still be able to get progression for that individual. This programming style also does not really work well with people who cannot be as consistent as they would like. And when I say that, I mean you don't know what's going to happen with work. You don't know what's going to happen with travel or with business trips or with your own illness and injuries. And so there's a downside there where if you miss a lift or you miss a week, it could theoretically throw off the entire program. And now we've got to, work our way backward to square one and try to kind of reinvent where we need to be in terms of our program. Now, a simple example of how this program has been traditionally taught, what you're going to see in the textbooks is that hypertrophy, strength, power in that progression. So usually if we work in 4-week blocks, those first 1 to 4 weeks are going to be hypertrophy work. This is higher volume, lower weight in terms of what we're going to use on the bar from a load perspective, 3 to 4 sets of 10 to 12 repetitions at a moderate weight. As we then progress, we go into our strength phase. Now we're linearly progressing to 4 to 5 sets, so more sets, but a little bit lower repetitions. So 4 to 6 reps at a little bit of a higher intensity. We're trying to develop strength during this phase. You're going to run that for 4 weeks. And then the last 4 weeks, weeks 9 through 12, we look at 3 to 5 sets of 1 to 3 repetitions with a maximum load. So we've linearly progressed. We've built the kind of the hypertrophy base to then be able to develop the strength, to then be able to peak and develop that maximum power. So now let's jump ahead to the second style of programming, which is undulating periodization. This is also commonly referred to as nonlinear periodization. So with this right here, now we have a more flexible model that allows you to vary intensity and volume on a much more frequent basis. And that can be weekly or even down to the day when we talk about daily undulating periodization. The core concept with this is that you can frequently change your training intensities and volumes to be able to stimulate different qualities like strength, hypertrophy, endurance, and power. This is essentially what I run whenever I use conjugate style training, is I'm using a form of undulating periodization. With this type of structure, we're varying our reps, we're varying our sets, we're varying the intensity levels from week to week or even day to day, and sometimes even within that same week. This is something that's definitely for your more advanced athlete or at least moderately trained athlete, where they are able to kind of, develop multiple physical qualities at the same time. And we're not just trying to focus on one specific portion or one specific attribute. So when we look at weekly fluctuations, okay, 1 week might be focused on hypertrophy. We're going to go higher reps, a little bit lower weight, more moderate weight. And then the next week, we'll focus on strength using lower reps, higher weights. Another option is daily fluctuations. So on Monday, you might do heavy squats for strength, which is going to be low repetition, higher intensity, higher weight on the bar. And then on Wednesday, we'll do higher repetitions of squats for hypertrophy. So we're training strength and hypertrophy within the same week. So some strengths to this style of training is that it prevents plateaus by being able to constantly kind of modulate that intensity and that volume. It also allows the athlete to target multiple qualities at the same time. So now we are able to push and develop more. So if we are, an athlete who needs strength, linear works, right? But if we want to be strong, have a little bit of muscle, be powerful, and be able to kind of weave this into our lifestyle, this is where undulating shines. This also helps to manage fatigue levels and increase recovery between sessions because we're training different things. So our strength, that neuromuscular fatigue that we get from a heavy squat day on Monday, is hopefully going to be recovered 72 hours later, and now we can train power. But we've trained both within the same week. We didn't just train one. So again, this works best for your intermediate to advanced lifters. People who want to be able to balance training goals and who want to have a little bit level of variety within their training, just to avoid getting burnt out or just being stagnant in their progression. The third model of periodization is block periodization. This is definitely a much more advanced style that you'll see, but this is a model that breaks your training year as a whole into distinct blocks. where we're focusing on a specific goal during these blocks. Each block here is going to emphasize a different physical quality. So we can have a strength block, we can have a hypertrophy block, we may have a peaking block, but we're going to have minimal overlap between the two blocks. So a structure that works really well with this is you have your accumulation block, where we're accumulating volume, we're developing hypertrophy, we're building muscle mass and work capacity. And then we move into an intensification block. Speaks for itself, right? We're slowly increasing the intensity here. Now we're building strength. And then we have a transmutation block where we develop speed and power focused. So with this, the athlete or the client that you're working with focuses on one aspect of performance for a set period of time, usually in a 3 to 6 week block. And then after completing that block, they then focus on a separate quality. Each block has its own volume and intensity manipulated to be able to maximize the desired outcomes. So again, this style maximizes adaptations because you're only focusing on one thing at a time. It helps to be able to peak performance at the right time, which is ideal for athletes who are prepping for competition or prepping for a season. And it helps to prevent overtraining of one physical quality by rotating the focus from block to block. Now, in terms of limitations, block periodization doesn't train all these qualities at once. So detraining of certain aspects is possible. So example, whenever we're focusing on strength or hypertrophy, endurance may drop because those can tend to compete for each other. So this is where residuals that we've talked about before, residuals come into play, where we develop our aerobic capacity, we develop muscle mass, and then we can shift blocks and hope that those residuals are able to then carry over into the next block. Another limitation here is that it's much more difficult for athletes who need to balance their training with their lifestyle demands, who need to be a little bit more flexible in their training programming. So again, this style of training, block periodization, is optimal for the advanced athlete who has a very focused and rigid schedule. This is powerlifters. This is Olympic weightlifters who are peaking for a specific event. Competitive athletes who need structured progression leading up into the competition. And then the fourth style is conjugate periodization. So conjugate is a training system that focuses on developing multiple physical qualities simultaneously through varied training methods. Those methods are the max effort method, the dynamic effort method, and the repetition method. The core concept here is that it's more of a hybrid approach that allows you to integrate strength, power, hypertrophy, all into a nice cohesive program. Typically, there are 3 to 4 training days using this type of approach where you're going to train max effort, dynamic effort, and repetition effort all within the same week for a given body part, or not really a body part, but for a muscle group. So lower body, upper body. And the training can vary within the same week rather than being cycled through different blocks or cycled week to week. So we'll have, with the conjugate method, we'll have max effort days for lower and upper body. We'll have dynamic effort days for upper and lower body. And then we'll also train the repetition for the accessories, focusing on hypertrophy with higher volume, moderate weights. Strengths to this style of training are that you are simultaneously building multiple qualities: strength, power, hypertrophy. You're not waiting for a block to complete. You are not having to worry about potentially missing a lift because you're going to hit that session again next week because it's built into the program. It also allows for constant variation and it prevents stagnation. And whenever I say constant variation, I don't just mean the loads are changing, but literally the movements themselves can change. During a conjugate style of training, we may go with a box squat using a safety squat bar one week. The next week, we might go with a high bar back squat. The next week, we might go with a cambered bar back squat with chains, right? We're constantly changing the movement itself from a week to week standpoint. The only thing that really stays the same, doesn't even need to, but that generally would stay the same, is your dynamic effort is almost always going to be the same style of movement, because that does progress in a linear fashion. The accessories, the repetition stuff, that can stay the same, but we might alternate that week to week, just kind of depending on who we're programming for and what the end goal is. This is best, in my mind, for the everyday athlete who wants a well-rounded program that's able to develop these qualities that it can build, right? Strength, power, muscle. We can toss in endurance work inside this and not really create too much overlap with the strength training. It's also ideal for busy athletes. Again, there's fewer days, there's fewer need to worry about a missed session, and you can still see your performance progress week to week, month to month, year to year. Now, the traditional structure of the conjugate method is Monday is going to be your max effort lower body day. Heavy weights, hitting a 1 to a 3 rep movement and then backing down, move over to accessories. Wednesday is going to be your max effort upper body day. Again, hitting a heavy 1 to 3 rep upper body movement, traditionally something that targets the chest and triceps, and then moving on to our repetition movements for the day. Friday, traditionally a dynamic effort lower body day, speed squats using bands or chains, moving it incredibly fast, incredibly explosive, and then using repetition for our accessories. Same thing on Sunday or Saturday in some cases, but usually Sunday we do a dynamic effort upper body day, speed bench press with repetition effort on the accessory movements. So now let's summarize those 4, because I went through a lot there and I want to make sure that everything we've talked about is fully clarified within this. So we have linear periodization that is very linear, week to week, month to month, and it follows that nice gradual progression. This is great for beginners who have clear goals over an extended period of time and have time in their life to be able to train in that linear fashion. Then we have undulating periodization, which is better for the intermediate to advanced athletes who need to balance multiple training qualities without plateauing. Then we have block periodization, which is ideal for the advanced athlete who wants to be able to peak for a specific event or a specific season and can only focus on one quality at a given time. And then lastly, we have conjugate periodization, which is perfect for the everyday athlete who wants to balance multiple goals of strength, hypertrophy, power with a flexible, systematic, hybrid approach. So now, given that, how do we choose a periodization model based off of lifestyle? First and foremost, let's look through with a critical lens on their lifestyle. Okay, what are their goals? Are they wanting to just be strong, or do they want to be strong and athletic and powerful? Training age. Are they new to the training game? Have they been working out for 10 years? What's their background in terms of training? Maybe they've never followed a program before, and so they need more structure. That can all go into this decision. How much time is available? Can they devote 3 hours a week? Can they devote 7 hours a week? That all goes into how do we split up their training? What's their, are they going to be training every single morning? Are they going to tell you that they're going to train every single morning, but they may miss, right? How does that all work in the grand scheme? And then consistency. Are they someone who's going to hit that session? Or are they someone who's going to potentially skip a session? That doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It just means that they might have a busy life. They might need to travel at the drop of a hat because they have a work trip that they need to go to. They have conferences that they need to go to. Maybe they have meetings throughout the day that run long and they can't hit their afternoon session. Maybe they have things that occur on the weekend with their family that they want to be able to spend time with them, and they don't have that time to devote to training, and that's perfectly fine. These are all just things that we need to take into consideration when we're sitting down and working through how we're going to structure a training program for an individual. Ultimately, we want to avoid being dogmatic here. Okay? There's no single perfect model. What's best depends on lifestyle, long-term habits, long-term sustainability. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the goal should be progress, not simply adherence to a strict training model. So to wrap this episode up, first and foremost, periodization and programming is all about organizing stress. How are we applying the dose of training that's needed to be able to stimulate a response and still be able to make progress? Okay. Think about what model may work best for you, what may be able to be adapted for your lifestyle, your goals, the constraints that surround your day-to-day life. How can you pick one that's going to be able to be the best for you? Maybe you like adding 5 pounds every week. Maybe you like having a different squat variation every week. What works best for you, and how are you going to be able to use it to effectively hit the goals that you've laid out for yourself? So thanks for listening to the Everyday Strength Podcast. If today's episode helped you learn something, do me a favor and make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. This helps the show grow, and it ensures that you never miss an episode. If you're on YouTube, drop a comment. I read all of them. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, then a quick 5-star review goes a long way in pushing this information to more people. If you want to go deeper, then join the Performance Edge Network. It's free to join, and it gets you access to my weekly newsletter, which is full of training breakdowns, physiology deep dives, and tools that you can apply immediately to become a stronger, fitter, higher performing everyday athlete. And if you're ready for structured programming, then I've got options for whatever path you're on. The Peak Performance Training Program is my flagship strength and conditioning program. And I also offer Peak 3X, which is a 3-day per week version for busier athletes, along with other programs designed for hybrid competitors, runners, and anyone who wants to train like an athlete year-round. You can find all those and more at HageleStrength.com. I appreciate you being here. Keep training hard, and I'll see you in the next episode.